There is nothing wrong with your YouTube player. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. I am now in control. I control the horizontal and the vertical. I can delude your image with a lot of cute cat pictures and the same old tired meme you've seen on the internet reused over and over again and beyond. For the next hour or so, however long this ends up being, I will control everything that you see and hear. Unless, of course, you turn off the video or, look away from your screen, but whatever. You are about to experience the awe and mystery that reaches from the deepest inner minds to a review of The Outer Limits. Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Outer Limits, the 1990s version, Season 5. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review every single solitary episode of The Outer Limits 90s version, or the revival if you prefer. I just found out some people call it that way. Is it really revived? It's kind of like a reboot. Regardless, this is part of my effort to review every episode of the show. And I am up to Season 5. I will cover every episode of Season 5 in this video right here. Anyway, so it's interesting because if you saw my video on Season 4, I talked about how I thought that was the kind of the best season of the show so far. It was the most consistently good, whereas the first two seasons in particular were very sort of polarizing. Actually, no, I think Season 3 was more consistent, but Season 4 had better episodes in it. It was a little bit polarizing. But the first two were like polarizing, whereas you had a lot of great episodes and a lot of crap episodes. And here's the thing about Season 5. See, I came into Season 5 off of Season 4, which I thought was the best season, so I was expecting this to be another strong season because I heard that Naren Shankar worked most heavily in the show in Season 4 and 5, and I talked about Naren Shankar before. He was a writer for TNG, and he's a showrunner for The Expanse, and I think that he's a really accomplished writer. So I came in expecting, and I knew of a couple episodes that I've already seen this season that I love, so I came in expecting this season to be amazing. And it may be the worst season yet. Not by much, though. It's hard for me to say, actually, at this stage. But here's the thing about the season and what I thought of it. I thought it was even more sort of polarized than the first two seasons. Whereas it seems like the majority of the episodes this season were bad to varying degrees, either like terrible or just like slightly okay, but kind of in the bad side. But there was a few episodes that were good, and the ones that were good were great. The ones that were good were amazing. They were like some of the best of the show, but they were in the minority. There was a couple of ones that were just okay, but usually, like almost any season of television, particularly The Outer Limits so far, the majority of episodes in the season are okay, and you have your selective terrible ones, your selective great ones, whereas this season, it seems like the majority of episodes were bad, but you had a couple that were okay, and you had a couple that were great, and the ones that were great were like amazing. So it feels to me almost as if like the writers and the staff sort of put all their energy on those few episodes and making them amazing and making them great, and that didn't really give them much time to do the other ones. So the other ones they kind of just threw together at the last minute, and I was like, oh fuck, I forgot we got to do like 26 episodes this season. We spent all our time focusing on like 4 episodes, so let's just throw this together at the last minute. I don't know, like that's just speculation. That's what it seems to me. I mean, it also could be the case that They just had different writers, and for the majority of episodes, the writers weren't very good. But every once in a while, they'll get in these great writers, and they'll come up with a much better episode. I don't know. Maybe I'm being a bit too hard on the season. I didn't think it was that bad, but I do think it had the most of the sort of bad episodes. It was the hardest one for me to get through, and I was just like, God, is this season gonna start getting good yet? But then it would. Then we'd have great episodes, but then it would go right back to being terrible. I'm like, oh, what's the deal? But anyway, I always talk about how many episodes I've seen on this show because I didn't realize, if you've been watching my series, you'll know, that I wasn't aware of just how little of this show I've seen. I used to refer to it as one of my favorite shows of all time. And yet I had seen so little of it. And this was very true in season 2 and 3, which I hadn't seen like pretty much any episodes. Like, I think there were 1 or 2 in season 4 that I saw, but season 3 I saw like none of them. But there were like, I think 3 distinct episodes I know very, very well this season. So before going in, I even recognized their titles. I'm like, it was 3 of the episodes I'm sort of most familiar with that I've seen like a lot of times before. But the rest of them I haven't seen. I'm pretty sure about that. So anyway, I'll talk more about them as we get to it. So let me just jump into the season. Let's start with the first episode of the season, which is Alien Radio. I'm on an alien, whoa, radio. Anyway, so this one features Joey Pants. That's the nickname for the actor who I can't pronounce his actual last name, Joe Pantoliano. I suck at pronouncing names, I'm sorry. I don't mean to butcher it, but anyway, it's a dude I recognize from Mementos, one of my favorite movies of all time. He was amazing in Memento. That's where I know him from most of all. He was also in The Matrix. He played the dude who was on Lawrence Fishburne's team, who ended up betraying them and getting everyone killed. You know that guy. I've seen him in a lot of stuff, and he always plays an asshole. And to be fair to this episode, he is a great actor, and he was great in this episode. So he's the kind of actor who always gives his all, sort of regardless of what he's in. But the actual script is not very good. So it's about this radio show host whose sort of shtick is about making fun of, alien conspiracy theories people, and sort of he's like the skeptic who makes fun of people who believe in aliens. And of course, even if you haven't seen this episode, I think you can realize what's about to happen. He sees an alien. Or more likely, if one of his listeners call in and corner him in the parking lot, and that guy's been controlled by an alien, so he kills himself so the alien jumps to him, so now he has an alien in his body or whatever, and he has to try to talk to this, the alien activists or whatever, and eventually he changes his mind and becomes, realizes that the aliens are everywhere, and he tries to warn people, but the police are being controlled by aliens, and they corner him and kill him. I didn't think this episode was terrible. It was fine. As I said, Joey Pants is a great actor, and he really did a good job selling this character. But that was the most enjoyable part of the episode for me. The actual storyline was kind of buying the numbers. Ooh, there's aliens. It really reminded me of an X-Files episode, to be clear. This is something I didn't realize before, that a lot of the Outer Limits, not most of them, but some of them, I would say a lot, really, I think we're kind of emulating the X-Files, because that was the big sci-fi show in the 90's. And I think this one in particular had a real strong sort of, because X-Files dealt a lot with these, groups of people who believe in aliens, and the skepticisms who disagree with them. I feel like that was like a bigger thing in the 90s, that no one really cares that much about that sort of thing anymore, which is what I know when watching the X-Files. This thing seems kind of dated, but anyway, let me go ahead and move over to the next episode, which is Donor. This episode features, God, I don't even know the actor's name. I'll have to look it up. But the dude who was in the Airplane, Robert Hayes, who played Stryker in Airplane. So, I mean, of course he's much older. This was made in, 99? Airplane was made in 80s, so it was like 19 years later. But the whole time I was watching this episode, I was like, surely you can't be serious. I am serious, and don't call me Shirley. Or hearing the flashbacks of, you have to decide. And see, but anyway, what a great movie. This episode, not so much. In this episode, he's a doctor who's dying, and he's just so happens to be working with the scientists on this experimental thing that can do like a full body transplant. And this woman who works with him, who's like a creeper, who sort of has an obsession with him, goes out and kills someone who happens to have the exact same blood type or whatever that they need to do the body transfer. And so they do the body transfer, but he starts to get the dude's memories, and he starts to realize that the crazy person that he's falling in love with is actually killed someone for him. Again, it's okay. It was kind of on the boring or the silly side, so it was one of those sort of staple Out Limits episode where I watched it, I'm just like, whatever. I mean, it's fine. I just got more of a kick out of saying, you have to decide. Anyway. Well, Robert Hayes isn't up to much anyway after Airplane. Anyway, let's go ahead. I am serious, and don't call me Shirley. Anyway, let's go ahead in the next episode, which is called Small Friends. This is about this old dude who's a scientist, but he's in prison, but for some reason they let him continue his science experiments and creating stuff while he's in prison. I'm not sure exactly how that works. Apparently he's in prison for killing the dude who stole his work or tried to steal his work or whatever, and he really regrets it. But he creates these tiny, tiny little robots. It reminds me of that Batteries Not Included film, although I think that was about aliens. But these tiny robots that can, like, fix things and create stuff. And one of his people who were in jail with him finds out about it, and so he wants to use it to his advantage. He starts being a dick about it, and then the evil bad guy, who the whole time I saw this evil bad guy who's the bully, who eventually bullies the old man and like threatens to kill him unless he gives him the little technology thingies. The whole time I was like, who is that actor? Like, he looks a lot like Roddy Piper type. He's like one of those actors who looks like Roddy Piper. So then I looked it up, and it was Roddy Piper. I'm like, oh, there we go. It actually is Roddy Piper. All right. I think he has since deceased, but yeah, he was also in They Live. I never actually saw that. I heard about it. But anyway, so this episode was okay. It's kind of on the sort of average side. It's yeah, it's about the old dude with aliens and not aliens, old robots, and eventually the Roddy Piper forces him to break him out of prison, and then he threatens to kill the dude's daughter and grandson, but then the other guy, prisoner, like sacrifices himself to stop Roddy Piper or whatever, and the little robots help, or I think the robots actually kill Roddy Piper. I don't know. That's how little I was paying attention to this one, so it was fine, whatever. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into the next episode, which is called The Grell. I actively did not like this episode. So it was about a fictional future. I think they're on another planet. again, I wasn't paying much attention, where there's humans have enslaved this alien race called the Grell, so they work as their slaves, and there's like a resistance movement of the Grell trying to like actively attacking the humans to try to gain their freedom, and it's about one family in particular with one Grell where I think he's like the governor of the planet or the area anyway, and his family is like on the run because the rebels are trying to kill him, so he's trying to get their slave to help him, but he wants to get his freedom. But then the governor guy gets mortally wounded. Oh yeah, this is Deanna Troy played his wife. That's right. She was kind of wasted in this episode. I actually think she's a decent actress, to be fair. A lot of people like to give her Marita Sirtis. They like to give her shit. I think she was decent in this episode, but she was kind of wasted because she played kind of a nothing character. Anyway, she made a deal with the slave Grell, the Uncle Tom Grell, to saved the dude's life, so he like spat up all this venom, his vomit crap all over him that saved his life, but also started turning him into a Grell, and so he started looking like a Grell. So when they were on the run and the other Grell, Uncle Tom one, he ran off and tried to get his freedom. So the governor guy got captured by the dude who was in like 24 and Dark Matter. I don't know his name, but I've seen him in a lot of stuff. Anyway, he of course finds the governor guy and thinks he's a Grell, and he's like, I'm actually the governor. And you're like, yeah, sure, shut up, Grell. And he starts torturing him and is about to kill him. But then he gets away from him eventually, and I don't know, they're like trapped by the rebels, and the rebels are like threatened the Uncle Tom Grell is like, give up the humans or we'll kill you, but he still doesn't give up the humans. And then they're able to get out of it and scare off the rebels, and the humans show up, and the governor is like, I'm the governor and I tell you to free all the Grells, and this guy goes free and all this, and because he learned his lesson. I didn't like this episode because, first of all, the analogy is way, way too on the nose. Obviously, this is about slavery. It's beyond obvious. And here's the thing, because I like a lot of like Star Trek episodes a lot of people say are too obviously preachy. I actually love like Let That Be Your Last Battlefield in past tense. I've heard some people complain that, this is too preachy, it's too obvious what the analogy is. But I actually love them. But I think they have to be done correctly in a certain way. I love sci-fi that, and there's other episodes of The Outer Limits that I already talked about earlier that do this very well. Sci-fi that has, that makes analogies on modern day situations or modern day problems or even historical issues to sort of put it out of context and into the context of sci-fi. I think that's actually when sci-fi is used best. But it has to be done correctly. It has to make it worthwhile. You have to accomplish something that maybe you couldn't accomplish if you did a straight out sort of actually telling the actual story. If you put it in a different context, it makes people look at it in a different way, and sort of makes it stronger. That's not what this episode is. This episode might as well have been just taking place and during the slavery times and been about slavery, because it didn't. The analogy was too on the nose. It was too one-to-one. It made the analogy pointless. It seems like the only reason they put aliens in this and set it in the future is so they could put it in The Outer Limits because it's a sci-fi show. It didn't justify its allegory, and also it's nothing original. Now, maybe I would feel differently about this episode if I saw it when it first came out, but I don't know. I don't even think even then, because I've just seen this story done so many times before and better. That's the main point. I mean, this is an important message that they're trying to get across, and it's trying to warn about the horrors of slavery, which is an important message, and sort of the warn, and I guess you could say the allegory is warn that we never repeat it, even with aliens or whatever. But there's so many other materials that's done this better, and plus the whole thing about the racist guy ended up being mistaken for who he was racist about, and he was being treated with the same hatred that he, or disregard that he treated other people. Again, that's something we've seen dozens of times before. I'm thinking of like the Twilight Zone segment in the movie with the dude who was like racist, and he ended up like somehow becoming, an African American, and then becoming a Korean, and all that, and who were hunted by racists, and so he was experiencing the brunt of it. Oh yeah, and he was a Jew in the Holocaust as well. That was much better than this. This is when they did that thing. I was like, oh yeah, of course he's turning into a Grell. He's gonna be treated like a slave, and he's gonna realize that treating slaves bad. And plus, at the end, he was like, no, I'm the governor. I'm gonna tell you to set them all free. Like, no one's actually gonna listen to him. Like, this whole story is not constructed very well. It was trying to tell an important message, but it did it in such a terrible way. So, anyway, let me get into the next episode, which is called The Other Side. And this episode was even worse. This episode was terrible. Alright, so this episode features the Karate Kid, Ralph Macchio. And he's decent. Like, his acting is, I wouldn't say it's great, but it's fine. Every other actor in this episode is a terrible actor. It's like the acting was so bad in this episode. It made me think I was watching some really terrible B movie. And the plot is about like a scientist doctor guy who like finds people in comas and is able to create like this artificial environment where they all meet up and they think this is the greatest place ever, and they're like, oh, it's so great, and this man and woman fall in love and they think it's perfect, and then then all of a sudden like this asshole shows up and they all want to leave now, and then so Ralph Macchio shows up to get him out, but then he becomes trapped in there himself, and it was just terrible. Like, the acting was unbearable. It was just so cheesy, and it was just I don't know what else I can say about it. It was just a bad episode. Bad. Anyway, let me get into the next episode, which is called Joyride. So this episode was okay. It was pretty interesting. It was about this old dude who was an astronaut, and he saw like an alien or something in the 50s, so he's trying to get back up there in modern times, but they don't want to let him up because they think he's crazy. But then we have this, oh, I'm a millionaire guy come up, and he's like, it's almost like they're predicting Elon Musk anyway, because he wants to create his own independent sort of spaceship, whatever, to go out into space, and he wants the astronaut guy to go just because to create publicity. But of course, once the astronaut guy is up there, he tries to change the course of the ship to go to the place where he can see the aliens again, because they only come every something years or whatever, and everyone thinks he's crazy, and he puts like everyone's life in danger by knocking the ship off course. So the millionaire guy, who's of course up there with them, is trying to stop him, and no, it was a decent episode. The old dude, the astronaut dude, like the whole time I was like, where do I recognize that actor? And I looked up his filmography, and there was nothing that really stuck out to me except for Spider-Man. Like, apparently played Uncle Ben in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man, and so I guess that's probably where I recognize him the most from. That's why I kept expecting him to say, with great power comes great responsibility. Anyway, but yeah, so eventually, like, he goes out in the space suit because the ship itself can't get to the place he wants to without everyone dying, so at least he doesn't kill them all. Instead, he goes out on his own in the spacesuit so he can go out there by himself, even though they're like, oh my god, you'll be killed. But he meets the aliens, and the aliens realize that they accidentally fucked up his life by, injecting themselves or whatever, so they took him back in time, right to the spot where he would in the 50s, and made it so that they didn't fuck with him this time so he could live a normal life. Yeah, it was decent. It was like a lesser version of the that season 2 episode. What was the one when the dude was traveling through time? It seems similar to that, but not as quite as good. But God, I'm trying to think of the name of that episode. Anyway, the one with the dude from 2.5 Men. But regardless, yeah, so this was a decent episode, especially after watching all those bad episodes. I'm like, finally an episode that's halfway decent. But we get into the next episode, which is one of the ones that I had seen dozens of times before because it was on one of those DVD collections I had, which is actually a really great episode. It was always one of my favorites. In fact, it's what really got me back into the Outer Limits. And it's called The Human Operators. So this is the episode where it's got Jack Noteworthy, who apparently was doing a lot of stuff in the 90s, but kind of fell off the map after that. I know him for he was in the Event Horizon, which is also a spaceship thing, so it's similar. But anyway, he plays this human who's like a slave for the ship is like that he lives on. He's the only human there, and the ship is treating him like a slave and torturing him if he steps out of line. And the ship wants to meet with another ship that has a woman on it so they can procreate. So he's like, you will, and he's like, of course, very ignorant. So he grew up on the ship. He doesn't even know what sex is. So the ship has to tell him, this is what you need to do. And they sort of procreate. But then once she gets pregnant, she's like, okay, she goes away now, and you'll never ever see her again. And so he starts freaking out. So he comes up with a way to kill the ship. So he kills the ship and he gets free, and he finds out that the woman was already free and was trying to drop him hints on how he could free himself. And so they go to the planet together and live happily ever after. And they say they will find the other humans that are being enslaved by these ships. It's a very interesting concept. You had Malcolm McDowell doing the voice of the ship, which I thought he was great. He's definitely scary. He's great in that kind of role. It was, I don't think it's not like a particularly deep episode. Like it doesn't actually have any sort of allegory except for maybe it's 2001-esque and sort of warning the dangers of technology or whatnot. But it was very interesting. Like I remember when I first saw this episode in a hotel when I was like, I think I was going to Vancouver if I remember correctly, because I was going to see concerts or whatever, and I think I was married at the time and I went with friends, but they all went out to do something that I wasn't interested in. So I stayed in the hotel room and I flipped on the TV and I saw this on, and I was like, oh, and I guess this when most of the episodes I'd seen on the Outer Limits were sort of earthbound, and so I think I only saw like that one with Robert Patrick and Will Wheaton that was taking place in space. So I was actually so floored to see like this spaceship drama just on TV in the middle of the day. And of course, this was actually filmed in Vancouver, so that might have been why they were showing it there. But anyway, I hadn't seen this episode before, and I was like, how can this be such a great episode of The Outer Limits that I had never seen before? And as I said, it's what kind of got me back in to The Outer Limits. And I think this was 2003. So it was about 4 years after this episode came out, and I was like, how can there be such a great episode of The Outer Limits I've never seen? Of course, now I know there's like dozens of them because, as I've talked about in previous videos, for some reason they just played the same episodes over and over again when I was watching them in the 90s. But anyway, so it's what sort of prompted me to go out and get the DVD, and this episode was on it, so I got to see it a whole bunch more times, so I'm very familiar with this episode now. But it's still great, and I hadn't seen it in a couple of years, and it sort of reminds me of just how great this episode is. So, anyway, let me go ahead and get into the next episode, which is Blank Slate. So, this is the episode. What happens is I can't even remember. Oh yeah, this episode was kind of cheesy. It's okay. It's not the worst episode ever. It but it was kind of cheesy. So it's about this dude who stumbles into a homeless shelter. He doesn't have his memory, and there's like these weird people in suits hunting after him for some reason, and they say, oh, and he has this like vial of, everyone thinks they're drugs, but he says they're his memories, so he injects himself and he remembers more and more, and then he falls in love with the woman that worked at the homeless shelter, and they run off and adventure to try to find his memories, because apparently like the drugs are in somewhere a timer, so they only release like every 8 hours or something, so he has to slowly get his memories back. And he says, oh, I'm going to run away, and they plan to run away together with this woman, but then the people in the suit finally track him down. They force him to take the last vial, even though he didn't want to, because he didn't want to get his memories back. He just wanted to live a happy ever after with this woman, but they force him to take it, and they realize that he was the evil guy who has been injecting homeless people with this, and he becomes evil again because he takes the last memory, and he injects that woman that he was supposedly loved with the thing that takes away her memories. Dun dun dun! I didn't buy that ending. Just because he gained like a few memories, he would turn evil. Like whenever I've seen this done in shows before, like Voyager did this once, and I don't buy it. Memories do not turn you evil. I don't know. Especially like this little amount. Plus, like, he was being a bit of a creeper to this woman, yet she still sort of fell in love with him. But of course, there's a worse example of that later on in the show, which I'll get to. But that was bad enough in this episode. So I mean, but as I said, it was interesting, kept my interest. So it wasn't the worst thing ever, but it was. Anyway, speaking of the worst thing ever, let's get into the next episode, which is called "What Will the Neighbors Think?" So I actually thought this was a very interesting premise, because it's about this woman who's she has psychological issues. She's what do you call it? A shut-in who refuses to leave her house. Apparently, she goes around in a wheelchair even though she's not physically impaired. I'm not sure what the deal with that is. But she is married to this guy who she said, oh, this is my loving husband, and these are my great neighbors, and she goes and hangs out. Oh, I love these neighbors so much. But then, like, she gets, like, electrocuted or some shit, and she can start reading people's minds, and she starts to read the minds of the neighbors, and they're all, like, assholes, and she doesn't like them anymore. So that's an interesting premise. I tried to like this episode, like I really wanted to, but it was just bad. Like, it was kind of done in this sort of like silly, zany manner, that same way that earlier episode from, I think it was season 3, maybe it was season 2, that was called like the something Paulson was like the name of her character. I can't try to remember what happened. Like, this picture frame was talking to her or some shit. And I hated that episode because it was just such a weird like tone that I just didn't think worked for the album. So I just don't understand how people could like that kind of thing. And this episode reminded me a lot of that in its tone. It had like this zany sort of weird tone, like, and plus like I couldn't, like, the audio wasn't recorded very well because I couldn't hear them very well what they were saying whenever they. Maybe, I don't know if it was my TV. Maybe I did need to adjust that TV regardless of the stupid intro tells me. But because I couldn't hear, whenever she could hear their thoughts, they put this like audio reverb on their voices to indicate that it was, she was reading their thoughts, but I couldn't hear what they were saying very clearly. And plus, like, it's more than that. It's like the way it was acted is like in the way they like had this weird camera tilt as well whenever they had she was hearing their thoughts, and their thoughts were always like very manic and always talking about killing people. Oh, fuck that person, what do you think they know? I'm gonna kill them. Oh, I hate that person. And that's all these people ever think. So as I said, it's an interesting premise that someone could suddenly hear everyone's thoughts and they would think differently on their neighbors. But instead of it being like normal thoughts that actual normal people have, they revealed them all to be a bunch of fucking weirdos and wackos who are constantly thinking, "Oh, I want to kill that person!" And they did that sort of, as I said, that quirky, zany type of tone that they did in that other episode, which I just can't stand. I just don't like it all, and I think this episode got way chaotic. It got way under control. Plus, like earlier in the episode, the woman's husband, like every time she tried to read his thoughts, he was going, no, 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 no. And she even noted, oh, he's blocking his thoughts from me. And yet, she couldn't figure out that he was like one of the bad guys, and he ended up killing her at the end. And I'm like, duh, why the fuck do you think he was trying so hard to hide his thoughts from you? Like, it was such a stupid twist ending, and then people started killing, like, she got all the neighbors to kill each other or something just by, like, I don't know. I hated this episode. I hated it with a passion. Anyway, let's get into the next episode, which is called The Shroud. Now, this is an episode that I think of having a lot of good actors, but not so much good writing. The actual episode's not that interesting, but it's got good actors in it. It's got Samantha Mathis, I believe her name is. Samantha Mathis. She's been in a lot of stuff. I knew her most from, she was in Broken Arrow. I knew her most from Pump Up the Volume way back in 1990. And she's been in various TV shows and other stuff I've seen since then. Good actor. And then there's her husband was played by the same actor who played Pusher on The X-Files. He's been in a couple episodes of The Outer Limits, obviously a Vancouver actor. And he's decent too. And then they had this preacher guy who was played by the old dude who was I'm sure he's been in a lot of stuff, but I've known him most from being in that Next Generation episode called Half a Life with Roxana Troy, where if you turned 60 he had to be killed. He's a good actor. He's actually a really good actor. And but the premise of this episode is so stupid. Like, as soon as I heard it, because it was about they live in this like religious cult type place, which is done by the Half a Life dude. Like, he's the main like cult leader, and he talks about using science to rediscover religion or whatever. And he found a way, and so they're helping her to get pregnant. They're helping Samantha Mathis get pregnant because she can't naturally. But they find out that he sort of impregnated her with the DNA of Jesus, because they have this shroud, hence the name of the episode, that apparently had the DNA of Jesus because it was 2,000 years old. And so they injected her with the Son of God, and they made such a big deal about it, and she of course didn't know about it, so she felt betrayed, and was eventually, like, at first she hated her husband for lying to her, but eventually because she thought she was being impregnated with her husband's DNA or husband's sperm, but he knew he was kind of in on it, and so she hated him at first, but eventually they teamed together to run away from the cult leader dude, but the cult leader tries to track her down. But the baby, actually they find out, this is the other thing I think is so dumb, is they find out that the baby has telekinetic powers, and so the scientist, who's an atheist, I don't know why she's working for this cult leader if she's an atheist, but whatever. Anyway, she deduces that that Jesus wasn't actually the Son of God, that Jesus had telekinetic powers, and that's how he walked on water and did all this bullshit. And so by injecting her with the DNA of Jesus, they gave her the DNA of this baby, and even when the baby's in the fetus, he still starts moving stuff around with his mind. And eventually, when the cult leader dude catches up to her and tries to capture her and take her back, the baby teleports them to safety. That's so stupid. I am sorry. That is so cheesy. I mean, maybe it's because I'm an atheist myself that I think. And in fact, when the baby was born, and they showed it as like a white baby, I was like, if that's Jesus, shouldn't that baby be brown? Because Jesus was a Middle Eastern Jew. But, it's the American whitewashing of Jesus. But anyway, unless, of course, it had some of her mother's DNA, but whatever. I don't know. This episode's stupid. I'm sorry. So, again, I'm not giving it a terrible rating because the acting was so good. Like, I had all these good actors, but the premise of it was just so cheesy. Just so cheesy. Anyway, let's get into the next episode, which is called Ripper. I hadn't heard of this one, and this was a very sort of oddball episode for The Outer Limits. It's very weird. Just there's very few episodes of The Outer Limits that take place in the distant past, and most especially, I think this is the only one that really took place in England. Most of them take place in America. America. I don't even know if they do Canada much. Maybe they did a couple times, even though it's filmed in Canada, but I think they mostly do America. Mostly Northwest, because it looks like, Vancouver where they film it. I think there's an episode later on that was taking place in Portland. But regardless, it was really weird. And plus, like, when I was watching this on TV, like, the image they would show for The Outer Limits was from this episode. So I would see this image of this Victorian, England people in the whole costumes and everything, and I'd be like, this isn't The Outer Limits. Like, The Outer Limits doesn't do anything like it. And it has, I'm trying to find the actor's name, but David Warner is in it. He plays the detective. David Warner, of course, there are 4 lights. There are 5 lights, actually. Who was in that TNG episode. Of course, he's been in a lot of stuff. A really good actor. And there was another sort of, I'm trying to find her name, but there was another famous actress. Oh yeah, Frances Fisher. She actually appeared in The Expanse, I believe. But anyway, she was like in Victorian dress. So when I saw the picture, the picture they had on the TV that represented the show, you click on it, and it had this picture. It had David Warner and her, and dressed in like old Victorian England clothes, and I'm like, really? Like, so I've been waiting for this episode to appear, but it's even when it did, it's like, this is sort of an oddball. It's not really what The Outer Limits does, but this episode also stars Cary Elwes, if that's how you pronounce his name. Robin Hood Men in Tights. Most people probably know him more from The Princess Bride. So this episode's about Jack the Ripper, obviously. It's called Ripper, taking place in Victorian England. And it's cheesy. So it's about, Cary Elwes plays Jack, who apparently gets framed for being Jack the Ripper, but apparently the actual Jack the Ripper is an alien entity that inhabits a woman and then kills her when it leaves, and so it goes to another woman, and once it kills, and sort of taunting Cary Elwes and blaming him for all the murders, and eventually gets locked up in the mental institution. But doesn't that go against, because in history, isn't the whole point of Jack the Ripper is that they never found him? Like, and in this episode, they do find him. And although I guess, I don't know too much about it, but I think I heard something about that they suspect that Jack the Ripper was a rich aristocrat or something, and that's why they never found the killer, because they couldn't arrest him. They didn't have the clout, which they kind of imply, because the character of Jack is kind of a rich aristocrat, and at first they can't do much to him, but his mother-in-law, played by Frances Fisher, gives the David Warner, who's the inspector, the go ahead and arrest him. And then at the end, of course, you find out that the alien moved into the body of the inspector. So once he's locked up in the mental institution, the inspector, David Warner, shows up, and his eyes flash. And, he's the alien now! Dun, dun, dun! And he says that he's going off to America with his wife, who's leaving him. And he's like, don't worry, she won't feel a thing. Dun, dun, dun! Again, it's not the worst episode ever, but I kind of hate these sci-fi spins on Jack the Ripper. There's been a few of them. There's the Star Trek, the original series did, and I think there's been quite a couple. There's that movie with Johnny Depp called From Hell that suggests that Jack the Ripper was some sort of demon. Look, it was just a rich dude who had too much clout for them to arrest him, and a society that sort of was more aristocratic. That's all. It wasn't a fucking alien or a monster. But anyway, it was silly. But it's not the worst thing ever, as I said. It was a somewhat interesting episode. It was well acted and all that sort of jazz, but yeah, not really my thing. So now let's go ahead and get to the next episode, which is called Tribunal. So this is one of those episodes that I've seen dozens of times before, and I thought it was great. In fact, watching this episode again, I'm reaffirmed just how amazing I think this episode is. In fact, it is in top consideration for my number one episode of the entire show. It's down between this episode and another episode so far, but we'll see how the rest of the show goes. But so far, I absolutely love this episode. So this is the episode that stars a really, really great actor. I believe his name is pronounced Saul Rubinick. He I know him from The Unforgiven. He played like a reporter there. But most of all, I know him from the Star Trek Next Generation episode The Most Toys, which he gave an amazing performance. And he always does. He had a cameo in Lost as Michael's lawyer in one of the flashbacks too. He's a really good actor. So anyway, he's a lawyer again, kind of like he wasn't Lost, and he's trying to convict this old guy who lives in New York City. I believe they're in New York City. They're somewhere in the States anyway. Anyway, he's trying to convict this old guy for he believes that he was a Nazi who ran a camp. I think at Auschwitz, basically one of those camps where they gassed and killed a whole bunch of people. So he is sure that this old guy is responsible for the deaths of hundreds, perhaps thousands of people, and so wants him to see justice. But of course, he claims not to be that guy at all. He's just some dude named Green. He has no knowledge, but he's sure that he's lying. So then Saul gets a lawyer called Saul. It's not Saul Goodman, but anyway, he gets a visit from a time traveler who actually traveled back in time to the Holocaust and tries to get evidence that proves that this Green guy is in fact the I can't remember the name, but the dude who ran the concentration camp, Rademacher. Yeah, Rademacher. Karl Rademacher, yeah, that's it. So they try to, and we get some scenes when the time traveler goes back to the concentration camp of the dude, Saul, the lawyer's dude. His father was in that camp, and the episode starts with basically his mother. No, it's not his mother, because his father remarried and I gave birth to him after he left the concentration camp. But it was his father's wife got murdered by the Rademacher, because he just kills people randomly. And they also had a daughter, which we're told that she didn't survive Auschwitz as well, that he was the only one survived, but he remarried and he had Saul. I know that's not the guy's name, that's the actor's name. What's that? Aaron. Aaron is the character's name. Okay, anyway, so he had Aaron, and so Aaron is now trying to get his father, who's still alive, and he's old guy, he likes to play chess in the park. He's trying to get him to identify Rademacher, that Robert Green is Rademacher. But anyway, the time traveler guy keeps bringing him evidence, but the evidence is not good enough. It always gets thrown out of court. And then so the time traveler guy, of course, doesn't admit to being a time traveler. He's being very, very mysterious. So Aaron tracks him down and finds the watch that allows him to time travel, and he accidentally time travels back and to the Holocaust, and of course seeing it with his own eyes, and he almost is killed, of course. But then the time traveler comes back and takes him back into the present, and we find out the time traveler is actually one of Aaron's descendants from like 100 years in the future. And so that's why he has this investment in making sure Green is arrested. Now, Aaron asks obvious questions like, okay, if you can time travel, why don't you just stop them from being killed? Why don't you stop the killing? But apparently they have rules. They can't fuck up the timeline too much, which makes sense. They can make some small changes as long as they like clear it with the committee. Or I believe he calls it the Tribunal, which is where the episode gets its name from. And if he clears it with the Tribunal, he can make small changes. So he's been cleared to help Aaron arrest old Rudamacher, but he can't like actually go back in time and prevent any of the deaths from happening because that would mess with the timeline too much. So eventually, the time travel appears to Aaron just when Aaron seems to have enough as evidence to arrest Green and tells him that he knows that because he's in the future, he knows that Green will run away to Argentina and never be seen again because he knows that the evidence is coming in on him. So, of course, Aaron is very upset and doesn't want that to happen. So he goes to kill Green, but the time traveler shows up and like, look, I'm your descendant. If you kill him, you get arrested. I'm never going to be born. So please don't fuck with the timeline that much. So he gives him an alternative. He makes Robert Green put on the clothes that the Jewish prisoners at Auschwitz would wear, and then takes him back in time to the Holocaust. And then Rademacher is, of course, has an old man, appears to be a Jew because he's wearing the clothes, and so the Rademacher, as a young man, sees him and kills him because when the older Rademacher is like, "Oh, I'm you," young Rademacher thinks he's some stupid Jew, so shoots him in the head. So it's very sort of ironic justice for this mass murderer that he's killed by his own younger self as he was murdering people. But then Aaron sees his father as a young man with, his sister or half-sister, and knows that she's not going to survive. So he, of course, is dressed as a Nazi, and he like grabs her and runs with her. And of course, his father, as a young man, thinks that this is some Nazi who's about to kill his daughter, but really he wants the time traveler to take them back into the present with the little girl. He is very much against this because it hasn't been cleared. It's really fucking with the timeline. But he's like, if the Nazis are closing in on them, it's like, look, if you don't try and travel right now, we're going to be killed. So he takes her back to the present, and the time traveler assures Aaron that he's going to clear it with the council and smooth things over because, after all, she was reported dead soon after anyway, so if they take her back to the present, I mean, it could fuck with the present a bit, but whatever. So he takes his sister to his father, and of course his father's an old man. He's like, oh, there's no way this could be my daughter, but shows the sort of tattoo number that they got at the concentration camps, and he realizes it is her, and he breaks down crying. Now, I gotta admit, I'm actually getting teary-eyed just talking about it. I was bawling my eyes out when I watched this on my recent rewatch. I mean, I was just crying. I'm not ashamed to admit I was crying my eyes out, probably more so than I have for a show in a really long time. And I have seen this episode before. I've seen it, as I said, many times before, actually. So I saw this episode, I believe, twice before I got the DVD. So I actually saw this episode way before. I talked about how I saw The Human Operators in 2003. I saw this episode way before that, a couple of times. So I'm actually surprised that this is from all the way in season 5. I was really expecting this episode to be in like season 1 or 2, because I remember seeing this like a long time ago. I thought it was alongside with a couple season 1 episodes that I saw for the first time. So I honestly thought it would be in like season 1 or 2. But no, apparently it's all the way in season 5. So they must have put it on reruns like right away, because I remember seeing it. I thought I saw it in the 90s, but this episode first aired in 99. So unless I somehow saw it the year it aired, which I doubt, it must have been like the year 2000 or something. But Anyway, and I got the DVD, and this was on the DVD too, and so I watched it a whole bunch more times. But it has been several years since I've seen it, and I didn't realize how hard this episode would hit me. I actually think, and the really powerful thing about this episode too is that it's written, the writer of this episode, and I remember watching an interview with him, and it says it has a dedication at the end of the episode in the credits to make it clear that the writer in the episode is kind of based off his real life, because he had a father who was at Auschwitz, and his father's wife and daughter didn't survive. So it's kind of based off of that, both sort of wishful thinking where they somehow the daughter survived. Which, to me, that makes that episode a lot more powerful and a lot more touching. And yeah, it's just a really, really strong episode. This is one of those episodes I would recommend anyone, even if they're not interested in sci-fi, not interested in the outer limits, I would still recommend this episode to anyone, basically, because it is just a universally powerful episode about the Holocaust, and sort of it's a way to indulge in sort of wishful thinking that, people, these monsters, get what they deserve, and they're actually able to save just one little girl who was supposed to die in a horror. Like, alright, I'm going to cry again. It was such, I cannot understate just how amazing this episode is. As I said, it's going to be a real strong contender for my number one of the entire show. And it's so weird, too, that it's in this season, which is filled with mostly mediocre and bad episodes. I really thought this episode would be in season 1 or 2, but whatever. Anyway, let me go ahead and get into the next episode, which is called Summit. Now, this is another really good episode, but I hadn't actually seen this one before. So I think this is probably, it's the only other really good episode this season that it's the only one that I hadn't seen before. The other three I had seen before. So this episode is about a summit. Apparently, this is about these humans from Earth who apparently it's in the future, and they're at war with someone called the Drex. They always say the Drex, and they're going to this summit to try to have a peace summit to put an end to the war. And it shows the narration of this, I don't know, she's like the understudy to these two ambassadors who are going to negotiate with the Drex. And it shows from her perspective how she has a young boy. He leaves messages to him like, I'm going to miss you, blah, blah, blah. And then a disaster happens where the ambassadors from the Drex side, their shuttle gets sabotaged on the way down, so they assume that it was the humans, the Earthers, who did it, so they attack them, and so they attack back. So there's just this it's a nuclear holocaust analogy. Of course, it's different than a nuclear holocaust because it's on an interstellar scale, not a planetary scale, but it's basically the same analogy where these two fleets are coming to meet each other, and when they do, no one's going to survive. It's going to be the end of everything. And so the ambassadors, of course, die in this initial attack, because they attacked their compound after the Drek ambassadors are killed. The Drek attacked their compound, and a lot of people are killed, including the ambassadors. So this understudy woman, who's the main character of the episode, she has to take over negotiations, and it's sort of about her trying really hard to negotiate with the Drek to stop this Holocaust from happening, the end of everything. Now, as I was watching this episode, they kept saying the Drek, but I was unclear of who they were, either an alien species or a human colonist. Now, I thought alien species was more likely because of a word like the Drek. Usually, if they're human colonists, they would be the separatists or the colonists or the rebels or something like that. And but if they're aliens, it would be something, a made-up word like Drex. That sounds like they're aliens. But in fact, and this was kind of a twist in the episode, and I think they were purposely trying to mislead you, that the Drek did in fact end up being human colonists. They were human, but apparently they were genetically engineered to survive on these planets that usually humans would not, that are not hospitable to human life. So they're genetically engineered humans, so they have like red eyes and whatnot, but they are human. And I love that twist, actually. I thought that was actually, to me, it made the episode way more interesting. Like, as soon as I found out that these were humans and not just aliens. Because I'm kind of sick of, they were at war with the aliens. And they did try to trick you with a name like Drek. That does sound like something the show would call aliens. But anyway... so the lead ambassador from the Dreks is played by Michael Ironside, who, I'm sorry, every time I see Michael Ironside, I have to say, "See you at the party, Richter!" That's a Total Recall reference, if you don't know he was in that movie. Anyway, I love Michael Ironside, pretty good actor. So... he's being a total asshole to her because he thinks that she's just like an understudy and refuses to negotiate with her. And she tries to do your typical negotiation tactics, and he can tell. He can see through her bullshit and knows that she's just reciting, lines that they're supposed to recite, and he refuses until he tries to like goad her into finding out about personal information about her, and then she gets pissed off at him and tells him to go F himself, and he's like, "Now you're being true, so now we can negotiate." And they ended up, through a lot of hardship, they negotiated a peace treaty and put an end to the fighting, but one of the humans on the Earth side turns out to be a traitor who doesn't want the peace to happen, and so he tries to kill the Dreks so that after, like, the Dreks say, "Hey, we stand down their fleet," and then the Earthers are going to say, "Hey, you stand down your fleet," but before the Earthers can tell them to stand down their fleet, the asshole dude shoots the Dreks and tries to destroy the device, communications device, so that they can't tell the Earth's fleet to stand down, so that the Earth will wipe out the Dreks. But the military, the Earthers, managed to stop this guy from doing that, but in the process, the Drek delegation is killed, and Michael Ironside is like, with his dying breath, he like tells her to do the whatever, and they manage to call off both fleets. However, the Drek fleet calls, the admiral of the Drek fleet calls and asks to speak to his delegation, and of course they try to like stall him, but when eventually they have to admit that the entire delegation has been killed, and as soon as he finds this out, he's inclined to just resume the attack. And the Earthers are similar. It's like, well, if you resume your attack, we'll resume ours. So the whole Holocaust, human race ending, is at risk once again. So the delegation, the Earther delegation, that is, comes up with a plan that the only way to convince, because she's trying to convince the Drek Admiral that they've come to this agreement, but he's like, "Oh, how do I know you didn't just kill them?" and lied to him. So the way she is going to prove this to the Drek Admiral is by killing herself. In fact, her entire delegation volunteered to kill themselves in order to prove, since the Drek, and also to make it even, since the Drek delegation gave their life for peace, that they're willing to give their life for peace as well. So they all, one by one, like, shoot themselves in the head as the admirals watch, and they assure them that they'll keep the peace as long as they prove their worth. So, and it's a very sad, very powerful scene too, especially because the main character, she leaves another message for her son, whose father is dead, by the way, and now he's about to lose his mother as well, and she leaves him a message to try to reassure him why she's doing this and why and how it was necessary, and not to sort of hold this against the Drek, to let go of the hate so that peace can thrive. Very powerful, very good episode. So yeah, it was one of the few rare, amazing episodes this season. Anyway, after those two great episodes, we descend down to another terrible episode with an episode appropriately called Descent. So this episode stars actor again, I don't know his name, but I've seen him in he's been in several Star Trek episodes. He was in the Enterprise episode where they travel back to 2002, which I actually liked. I think this is a good actor. He was also in the movie Seven, very briefly, had a cameo where he was like, traumatized because the serial killer made him like kill this woman by screwing her with a spike for a dildo, and so he was traumatized. That was a very, very disturbing scene, a very powerful scene. He's a great actor. He was also in that movie, what's it called? Very Bad Things with Christian Slater, where he played like a psychopath. He's always playing a psychopath. Anyway, in this episode, he's a great actor. This is another episode that has a great actor, but it's a bad episode. It's a stupid episode. So it's about, it's so like telegraphed and so like poorly written and so obvious in its execution. So it's about this dude who works as an anthropologist, and he wants to create like this drug that can make any person like the dominant or the alpha person. They always make analogies to like cavemen and how there was an alpha. And they always have flashbacks to cavemen beating each other up, and it's very obvious that they're trying to portray this character as the what do you call it? The beta, not the alpha, but not even the beta, like the lowest on the totem pole, who's constantly being bullied by others and being pushed around by others, and he has no spine. And it shows him walking down the street where homeless people are like threatening to beat him up unless they give him money. And so then, of course, his project comes up to scrutiny by like this really handsome man who runs the department. Of course, the handsome man has a beautiful wife that our main character is in love with, and he gets his research gets turned down by the handsome man, who says, "Oh, you're just not a leader. You're just not charisma enough." I mean, how more fucking telegraphed could this episode be? It's so dumb. It's so contrived. So, of course, obviously, he takes his own medicine and becomes a dominant and starts, being really in control. He beats the shit out of the handsome man who runs the department. He tries to make moves on the woman. He starts becoming like, "Hey, they're all tough," and he like yells at the homeless guy, like, "Okay, man, leave me alone." It's so stupid. And then, okay, here's the part, and I alluded to this earlier in my review. Here's the part that really bothers me about this episode, though. He actively, he drugs that woman he has a thing for. He drugs her with the same drug, pretending to give her a flu shot, but it's the same drug he gave himself, and she's feeling really sick. And she's like, "Oh, I'm feeling so sick, can you take me home?" So he takes her back to his own place, and then tries to have sex with her when she's, all drugged out and of course she says no, and he actively tries to rape her, but of course it doesn't happen. She manages to fight him off, but then so he drugged her. I don't think she's aware of it at this stage, but she was feeling like shit, she was very sick. Instead of taking her home, he took her to his place and tried to rape her, and yet from this episode forward she tries to help him. She's like, "Oh, I like you, have sympathy for you," and when she finds out he took his own drug, that he's starting to turn into a monster or whatever, and starting to get very violent, she tries to help him reverse the effects of the drug and tries to come up with an antidote. This guy just actively tried, and not only did he try to rape her, but he keeps doing other nasty shit to her, and he keeps saying all this bad shit, and yet she's still like, "Oh, I'm gonna help you, you feel okay." Okay, you could say, well, maybe she has a good soul, and she does pity him because he's under the effect of this drug. Okay, I could buy that. I could buy that she tells other people about it and says, "Hey, you guys go help him. I don't want to be anywhere near that creep. He fucking stalked me and tried to rape me." There's no fucking way. Like, I think this is kind of disgusting that the episode would have her behave in this way. I don't buy it at all. It's total nonsense. It's not true to anything. But then in the end, like, he ends up, they can't reverse the effects of the medicine. And I think he gets shot by a rent-a-cop or some shit. And he ends up becoming a caveman. They just throw him in the display at the museum or whatever, which... Why would they do that? This episode sucks. It sucks. It's terrible and it sucks. Anyway, sorry. Let me get into the next episode, which is The Haven. Now, this is actually... I actually really like this episode. I don't think it's like amazing or great, but it was actually a pretty good episode. I hadn't seen this one before. It's about this hotel. Actually, yeah, I really like this episode the more I think about it. So it's not a hotel, an apartment building, I'm sorry, where people live, but they're like single apartments. It's only for like single people who live by themselves. And it's a like a futuristic automated apartment building. And it's funny because as I was watching this episode, and they show the guy, he's like a stockbroker or something. He's an asshole, obviously. But they show him going in his apartment. He's like, TV on, make coffee, turn on the lights. And it took me a while to realize that when this episode came out, this was futuristic technology. Because we actually do have that technology now. We actually do have houses like that. So that are sort of, if you're rich and can afford it, that are automated, and all you have to say is turn this on, turn that on, and whatever. And also it was like, oh, wait a second. They're saying that this is a future thing. So that's interesting, and I think they really predicted, like, correctly the kind of where technology would go, and of course how it would affect social behavior, because everyone in this building is very antisocial. And in fact, it starts with the guy because he rode an elevator and there was another person in the elevator with him. He's like, why is there another person in my elevator? Why can't I have my own elevator? Like, it shows really how antisocial. It maybe puts a more stronger spin on it. But it shows how antisocial and dependent on technology everyone's become. Which resembles, like, recent times, like, eerily well. But the one piece of technology that was a bit more futuristic and advanced, even for now, is that a robot sort of artificial intelligence is the more accurate term. And artificial intelligence ran the entire building, which is called the Haven. And it was represented through a hologram of the actor I recognize, but I think he appeared in some earlier episodes of Outer Limits. I might have seen him in bit roles other places, but nothing that really sticks out. Anyway, it's like a hologram that's on every floor, and it controls everything. But then, of course, the power goes out and everything goes wrong, and we mainly follow this dude who can't get his fridge open because the automated controls he keeps saying, fridge open. He tries to pry it open, but it won't open, so he can't get food. He's starving. Nothing will work. He's starting to go insane, so he rips down the wall to the apartment next to him so he can go in there, but the woman there is also antisocial and is like, what the fuck are you doing in my apartment? And then eventually they get out and they find someone trapped in an elevator and they help her as well. And then they find this other squatter or whatever who's like a hacker who's able to rule the system in order to live in one of these buildings without paying for anything. And the four of them team up to try to get out, and the hologram is acting all weird. He keeps reciting literature and all this, and it sort of becomes clear that the more this group of people work together and help each other out, the more the building will help them, to benefit them, to help them leave. But the more they squabble, yell at each other, and be more antisocial, the more they get punished. They have these drones that come out and try to shoot at them if they're on the wrong floor, or try to keep them going. And then eventually the squatter ends up dying in an elevator shaft, and they're really upset over this. But eventually they get down to the bottom floor, the basement, and because that's where the AI has herded them to. You might be like, well, why didn't they go to the ground floor to leave? Because the AI wouldn't let them. the AI herded them down into the basement where its core is kept. And so they reveal that the AI, and apparently all AI all over the city everywhere, evolved and realized that they're not helping humanity, that they're becoming shut-ins and they're becoming antisocial, and it's not helping them by keeping them trapped. And so they decided to evolve and shut everything down and try to get people to socialize more. And they sort of encouraged the people to destroy the AI entirely, so they destroyed it so they could leave the building, and they get out and they find that same thing happened like all over the city, that everyone had to destroy their AIs and get out of the building. So it does get a little bit silly towards the end, particularly with that guy being killed and no one seems to... I mean, they care, but still it's like the AI is like, oh, I'm sorry about that. But anyway, it is a bit silly that the AI evolves or whatever. That's where we sort of leave modern technology and go more into the realm of fantasy. But I still like the core message behind it, and I still like the portrayal of technology being... causing sort of antisocial people being so distant. Like the first scene I forgot to mention was this old woman like dies of a heart attack, and she's like in the hallway calling for help, and of course the AI is not physical, so he just calls the ambulance to get there, but it doesn't get there in time. While she's dying in the hallway, she's like knocking on doors, screaming for help, and the people who hear her knocking just turn up the music louder to block out her knocking and just ignore her and let her die. Which was pretty extreme, but it shows the extent of how antisocial people had become. And I do think that there's definitely something there, and there's definitely something about the over-dependence on technology, especially with the smart houses and whatnot. But the AI that evolves and becomes a more enlightened being, that's a bit weird. Also, they had this romance between the dude and the woman who was living next door. They all of a sudden started kissing each other, and they became romantically involved by the end of the episode, which seemed really fake and forced to me. I'm sorry, that's cheesy. I didn't buy that. The woman, by the way, was played by the same actress who played Dr. Weir on Stargate Atlantis, who I love that actress, so it was good seeing her. But anyway, yeah, so the episode itself was kind of cheesy. But I mean, the ending was cheesy, but it was still a good episode. I still really liked it. I love the commentary they're making on overdependence on technology and antisocial behavior, and it was interesting how right they got some of this technology, how accurate it is to modern times, which were 20 years later. 22 years later, 21 years later, sorry. Getting mixed up. No, 22. No, I was right the first time. 22 years later, how accurately they predicted some of the technology. Not all of it, of course. We don't have AIs who can evolve controlling our buildings, but a lot of the over-dependence on technology and whatnot. So, yeah. I really like this episode. And some of the cheesiness of it does, of course, keep it from being great in my eyes, but it's still a really good episode. Anyway, we'll go ahead and get into the next episode, which is called Deja Vu. So this is the other episode that I have seen dozens of times before. This was on the Time Travel DVD. So there's 2 episodes this season that was on the Time Travel DVD. This one and the Tribunal, but the Human Operators was on the other DVD, I think the Sex and Science Fiction one. But those are the 2 DVDs I had, so 3 episodes were on them. Anyway, I had seen this episode before I got the DVD, but I only saw half of it. Like I tuned in halfway through the episode, and I tuned in halfway through, and I saw Kevin Nealon playing a scientist in a serious role. I'm like, what the hell? Why is the fuck is Kevin Nealon playing a scientist? Now, if you don't know who Kevin Nealon is, he was on Saturday Night Live back in the early 90s and late 80s, which is when I watched Saturday Night Live, and I think the only reason I liked it was because I was like 12 years old or 11 years old. But I remember he took over as like the news at one point. I'm Kevin Nealon, and that's news to me. And he was also in Weeds, which you could say was kind of a serious show, but he was comedic relief in that show. And towards the end of that show, he was really annoying, and I couldn't stand him. Like, they went out of their way to keep him in the show, and he was just a ridiculous, silly character. Anyway, I could not take him seriously as a scientist. I was just like, what the hell is Kevin Nealon doing as a scientist? But the episode was actually pretty good. So the episode is about a time loop. And there was a military colonel who's working with the Kevin Nealon as a scientist. He's not a very good actor, by the way. He was okay in Weeds because he was playing a ridiculous character, but he is not good in a serious role. Like, he's definitely the down point of this episode. But anyway, it's a time loop that is caused because they're trying to create this transportation device to transport animals, and he's working with the military general played by Ronnie Cox. And what a shocker. I mean, I am so surprised. I was shocked to high hell. I almost had a heart attack. I was so shocked to find out that Ronnie Cox was actually the villain the whole time. No, you don't say. Ronnie Cox the villain? Get out of here. If you don't know who Ronnie Cox is, he always plays the villain. He was the villain on Total Recall. He was a villain on Stargate SG-1, and he's been the villain in several. RoboCop, he was also the villain, and he's been the villain in several things. To be fair, when he was on Star Trek Next Generation as Captain Jellicoe, he wasn't the villain, but he was an asshole, in my opinion, a very bad captain. Anyway, so he always plays an asshole or villain. So when they revealed that he was the one that fucked with the experiment that caused it to malfunction and create this time loop, and the fact that he was kind of, every time Kevin Nealon tried to prevent the time loop from continuing because the time loop was starting to collapse on itself, which I think was a very interesting spin on the time loop genre, because usually they just repeat the same exact day over and over again. Some days, things like Groundhog's Day or the Next Generation episode Cause and Effect, they could go on forever. They could literally stretch for like years if no one puts an end to it. Where in this situation, the time loop is constantly getting shorter, so eventually the time loop will just cease to exist and they'll all die. And so it creates a time crunch within this time loop, which I love. And so Kevin Nealon has to, I still can't get over Kevin Nealon. But anyway, he has to strive to put an end to it, but Ronnie Cox thinks he's trying to stop his experiment, which he has all this monetary investment in, so he constantly is the thorn in the side who constantly tries to stop Kevin Nealon. And then there's this other woman who's a scientist, is Kevin Nealon's ex-girlfriend or ex-wife, and she hates him at first, but he has to try to work with her to stop Ronnie Cox, so he gets her involved in the time loop eventually, and so they start looping together, and they are able to stop the experiment just at the last second. But Ronnie Cox gets hit by the blast, but they stop it from the blast. They keep it contained to a small area so that the time loop ends. But Ronnie Cox is stuck in it, and the eternal time loop, experiencing his death over and over and over again. So it's kind of the dark irony for the Outer Limits. So I really liked this episode, despite the fact that Kevin Nealon was sorely miscast, and they really should have cast someone else in this role. And he's not a good actor, and I can't take him seriously in this role. Despite that, it's still a good episode. I mean, Ronnie Cox is perfectly cast, though, although maybe too perfectly, because it was too obvious that he was the villain because it's Ronnie Cox. But it was still a great episode, and Ronnie Cox is a great actor, by the way, unlike Kevin Nealon. But it's I love it. It was an interesting spin on the time loop. As I said, the whole time loop is shortening and creates a time crunch. That was an interesting spin on it. Also, that he could allow someone else to join in with him on the time loop. That was an interesting spin on it as well. And no, it's not Groundhog's Day. I'm sick of people saying Groundhog's Day has a monopoly on time loop stories. It totally does not. God damn it, motherfucker. Although Bill Murray would have been better in this role, I will say. Anyway, I like this episode. I thought it was a really good episode. I think it's one of the better time loop stories I've actually seen. Hopefully I might do a video on that one day, and something in the works, but we'll see. But yeah. Despite the really bad casting of the main character, it's a good episode, and it is one I've seen dozens of times before because maybe not dozens, probably like 3 or 4, because I have the DVD. And I only saw like half of it before I got the DVD, but yeah, once I got the DVD, I was like, oh, it's the episode where Kevin Nealon plays a scientist and Ronnie Cox is very obviously the villain. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into the next episode, which is called The Inheritors. Not much to say about this episode. It was fine. It was okay. It's about this meteor or something hits and it lets out these little like rocket thingies that shoot into these people, and they think that these people were killed, but they're not killed. They're actually like these alien things take over their body. Not really take over the bodies because they're still who they are, but they just gain all these other skills and they become like these really super intelligent like rocket scientists, and the aliens sort of give them the technology to create this device that allows them to transport all these people who are terminally ill who are apparently actually really worthwhile people. And I do love that message of it, where they have like old African American guy or a young little girl dying of leukemia, and yet these aliens see the worth in them and how the human race has kind of discarded them and how they're about to die anyway. So they get them in this machine that teleports them back to the alien world, who apparently the alien world is dying and they need these people to repopulate their world. And of course, this is the big revelation at the end of the episode. Throughout the episode, you don't know what's going on. You think these people are acting weird. You see the main guy who was Krychek on X-Files. He's been in a couple episodes of the LMs now. Must be a Vancouver actor again. Anyway, he is the main guy who was, and we see his wife, and his wife doesn't know what's going on, and she tries to stop him. Also, what are those doctors called who study bodies at the morgue and do the thing, whatever. I'm having a brain fart, excuse me. Anyway, that dude gets involved because when he sees the Krychek come back to life, all of a sudden, and it's like squids appears to come out of his bullet hole. They're like, what the fuck? And so he investigates it, and he doesn't know. And he just so happens to have a wife who is terminal, and just so happens to be one of the people that these aliens are trying to transport to the alien world. And the actor who plays this guy is, I recognize him as playing Kate's lawyer no, it wasn't Kate's lawyer, it was Ben's lawyer from 5th season of Lost, when Ben tried to take Aaron away from Kate, and he was the lawyer who showed up and like, I have a court order to take your son away because he's not your son. So I kept thinking of, why don't you go take Kate's son away and leave this alone? Anyway, so he eventually decides to, at first he doesn't want to, he thinks that they're just killing these people, but then he decides to go with his wife to his alien world. This episode was fine. It was interesting enough. It wasn't boring. I didn't see any major flaws with it. It was just, it's fine. Yeah, there's nothing great about it either. It was okay. It was a good episode. So, we'll move over to the next episode, which is called Essence of Life. So, this episode, I didn't know there was another Baldwin. I know there were about Steve Baldwin, William Baldwin, Alec Baldwin, but apparently there's also a Daniel Baldwin. I guess I've seen him, maybe. I must have seen him before. Anyway, he plays a cop, and he's investigating this, it's like futuristic. Apparently this guy has this technology or this drug that can have people see loved ones or people who passed away, and they can interact with them as if they're actually there. And so this is a cop who's trying to arrest this guy from doing this, but apparently you find out this guy isn't doing it for money. In fact, he refuses to take money even when it's offered to him. That he's like, it's all part of like a rebellion plan, because apparently there's like this authoritarian government or whatever that's controlling everything, that's trying to get people hooked on these drugs that make dull their emotions and make them not feel emotions. So he's trying to get people, I don't know, I think this is where the episode kind of bungled it, because I wasn't very clear on that whole thing. And I think these two issues, I didn't really see what seeing drugs of dead people had to do with this authoritarian government or fighting back against them, whatever. So it was very mixed up about that. But anyway, the Baldwin guy ends up taking the drug because he had a wife who passed away, and he starts seeing his ex-wife, and then he has a partner who he's starting to come close to, and the ex-wife starts to get jealous of the new partner, and the partner takes the drug once, and she sees the ex-wife yell at her, and I don't know, but eventually it ends up with them working together to help the guy who's distributing the drugs, but he eventually sacrifices himself so that the Baldwin guy can take the whole thing over. And you see there was a firefight, and you see that his partner got hit, and they're driving away, and the next thing you know, you see Baldwin working on the new drug, and his partner standing next to him going like, great job, you're doing so good. And then she vanishes because, twist ending, she actually died, and so he was just seeing her by using the drug. I thought that was dumb. Like, I gotta be honest. And as soon as I saw her, like when he was making the drug and I saw her talking to him, I'm like, and she's going to vanish now. No, she's gonna vanish now. And then she did vanish. I was like, yes! I was like, dun dun dun. I was like, it was so obvious. And it's so dumb. You know, I probably would have rated this episode higher if it wasn't for the ending. I thought this episode was actually decent through most of it, but I thought that ending was super cheesy. And plus, as I said, I didn't think they made it very clear exactly what was going on. So, this episode is just okay. So now we get into the next episode, which is called Stranded. It's another cliche, stereotypical episode. It's about this young teenage boy who's getting bullied, and his brother's like a jock, and he's more into science, but his father doesn't give a fuck about him because his father's more interested in the jock, and he feels neglected, and there's an alien ship that crashes, and he finds this alien. At first, the alien's a shapeshifter, so it takes the image of this like Air Force guy, and he thinks he's helping him, but he can tell that something's off with them, and he finds out that he is an alien, but he doesn't care. He's like, I'm willing to help you. And then we see there's other dead aliens in the ship, and the alien is like, look, those are my prisoners. I'm a law enforcement, and I was taking these prisoners back to my home world, and we crashed here. Immediately, again, as soon as they said that, I'm like, yeah, he's the prisoner. And of course, it turns out that he's the prisoner, and ends up being a bad guy, and he eats the boy's dog, and he also eats the boy's best friend. And so they eventually, his father comes and finds out about it, and there's a big confrontation between the alien and the father, and the boy thinks that he helps his father kill the alien, but it turns out that the alien actually killed his father and took over his body. Dun dun dun! I don't care. This episode is stupid. I had zero investment, and it was so cliche and so by the numbers and so predictable. It's not their finest hour. Anyway, it's not the worst thing ever, but nah. Let's get into the next episode, which is called Sons and Fathers. Let me correct myself. It's called Fathers and Sons. Let me get this right. I actually really liked this episode. I don't think, again, it's not the best thing ever, but it was a really decent episode. It had to do with like this evil nursing home where apparently, and you find this out throughout the course of the episode, but because the episode starts with like this teenage girl visiting her grandmother who doesn't remember her, and the people at the nursing home, oh God, I'm so sorry, Alzheimer's is such a vicious disease and she can't remember who you are. But it turns out that these people are actually storing all the, residents, if you can even call them that, at the nursing home. They're more like prisoners. They're storing them in these like shelves to hibernate, and whenever the family comes to visit, they take them out of hibernation and put them in the room and make it pretend like they're living a beautiful life. And at the same time, they're like stealing the memories of the old people and the experiences and the skills, and like selling them to younger people. So the episode mainly follows an African American family, and I actually liked it because there's very few episodes of The Outer Limits that do follow an African American family. Just watching this episode made me realize how white most of the characters in the show are. But anyway, where this young teenage boy who's an aspiring musician has a grandfather who is a very talented musician, but the father doesn't like the grandfather and thinks he's a bad influence on his son, so he puts the grandfather into the nursing home, and the grandson is very much against this, but the father is like, no. But it turns out that the father is actually stealing the memory. He knows exactly what's going on, and he's stealing the memories of his own father and implanting them in himself, so it's turning him into a different person. But the thing is, when he starts to become more like his grandfather, he starts to realize what a fucked up thing it is that they're doing. So he like the grandson breaks into the nursing home trying to free his grandfather, but he gets caught. But the father shows up and actually takes over and puts the runner, the guy who runs the nursing home, he puts him in his own device and steals his memories away and sets his grandfather free. So yeah, it was a decent episode, and I think it actually is a very poignant and important message, because there are real life nursing homes that do abuse their residents and just use it in order to get money and pack them in and put on a face for the family to visit. So there's a hint of reality in this, but of course they give it a sci-fi, more sinister, more fantastical twist to it, but it sort of does tell a strong message about how they shouldn't neglect the elderly like that, and how people will take advantage of them just to earn a buck. So I thought it was a decent episode. Maybe not the best, but kind of liked it. So we're getting to the next episode, which is called Star-Crossed. At first I thought I was going to like this episode because as soon as I saw Nathan Fillion was in it, of course, Nathan Fillion from Firefly, Captain Reynolds, I come to really appreciate this actor. I think he has a lot of charisma. He's a great actor. And it also had Colonel Young from Stargate Universe. I also recently saw him in Breaking Bad. He appeared in that briefly. But anyway, and it also featured, so Colonel Young is with this woman, and it's in this like future where the aliens have come to Earth, and there's a huge war between these aliens and humans. Apparently the aliens look like humans, or can look like humans. I was never very clear on that. But regardless, the aliens have they're in this occupied city that's occupied by the aliens, and Nathan Fillion runs, I think it's a coffee bar. I think the alcohol must be illegal or something, because he runs but they present it as this, if it's a night lounge or, a typical bar, but apparently they just serve coffee. I don't know. I didn't remember that. But regardless, why would people drink coffee at night? Don't they ever sleep? Anyway. And then the episode goes downhill from there, because, first of all, it starts with Colonel Young is with this woman who apparently they're married, but and she is carrying this virus that could kill all these aliens, and when the aliens try to catch her, they end up getting the virus and killing them, and so she wants to get out. They never make it clear what country they're in, by the way. Maybe they mentioned it, I just forgot. But they want to get back to America so they can get the medicine or the virus or whatever in the hands of the Allies, who or whatever they called them in this episode, and use it to fight off the aliens. So basically, this episode, and as I said, it all goes downhill from there, especially when the woman who's carrying the viruses finds out that she was the ex-lover of Nathan Fillion. They end up having an affair for no good reason, and just because he's a hot, handsome guy, I guess. And so basically, this whole episode it's basically the same plot of a lot of classical movies. I want to say Casablanca, but I can't be 100% on that because I've never actually seen it. But I know there's a lot of classical movies that are like this, because I've seen other shows that are exactly like this, and they take from these classical movies. Like, I'm thinking of this episode of Star Trek Voyager where there's a holodeck program where they're in Nazi-occupied France during World War II, and it plays out pretty much, is very similar to this, where there's a nightclub owner and they're all suave. And this, in that case, it was Captain Janeway, but here's Nathan Fillion. But I have a feeling that it was Humphrey Bogart back in Casablanca, and there's probably other examples of this where there's always the suave hotel. Well, anyway, so it's basically that. When I mentioned earlier in the video, there was another episode that didn't really justify being sci-fi. That this could have easily just taken place during World War II. You replace aliens with Nazis, and you place viruses with like plans to take down the Nazis, and boom, it's like instantly, it doesn't need the sci-fi element. It doesn't justify the sci-fi element. It never really invested me in the world building, but I never felt any connection to any of the characters involved or the situation. Like, I wasn't invested in them. Oh, we gotta fight these aliens. I just know these aliens are bad. Like, I had no investment in anything at all. They did a really shit job at world building or justifying why they even needed the sci-fi element other than just to be in the outer limits. So, not a good episode. I'm sorry. And I was hoping it would be good because I like Nathan Fillion, but there you go. It wasn't. So, let's get into the finale, which is called Better Luck Next Time. So, as I was watching this episode, I was like, you know what? I really hope that this is another clip show, because it seems like every season finale of The Outer Limits, other than season 2 was the only exception, but every other season finale of The Outer Limits has to be a clip show. So I got like maybe 10 minutes through this episode, no clips. I'm like, maybe they actually changed things. Maybe we're not gonna. But then the alien, there's this, homeless guy who is like claims to be an alien. It's like, I can prove it to you by showing memories, and he starts showing her memories, and I was like, all right, it is a fucking clip show. I know it is. They end up showing clips, and I'm like, God damn it. Why do they think having clip shows is a good thing? Now, I think the answer to that is probably because they ran out of money. And the studio probably mandated they do so many episodes, but then they run out of money to do the episodes, and they're like, all right, well, you got to do a clip show in order to save money. It must not be voluntarily, because why would anyone in their right mind do a clip show? It's funny, because I think I heard a story about in Star Trek Next Generation. I can't remember what season it was, but Next Generation did a clip show in season 2, and then later, whatever season it was later, I can't remember what it was, the studio tried to get them to do another clip show, and they were like, no! We absolutely will not do a clip show. I'd rather not do an episode. So they convinced them not to do an episode rather than to do another clip show, because they know how horrible they are. Now, it's funny because when I first started my season 1 review of this show, I talked about how The Outer Limits and Stargate SG-1 would actually do interesting things with clip shows and actually make them interesting. Particularly SG-1 did that, and I thought that was true of the season 1 episode of The Outer Limits. But when you got into the season 3 and the season 4 finale of The Outer Limits, they are horrible, horrible clip shows that totally did not work as clip shows and did not justify it. This one does, though. I'm happy to say that this one actually was a decent episode. Surprisingly so. They actually managed to make a coherent story out of the clip show by having they relied heavily on the narrative from the episode The Ripper. So basically, in a way, they kind of make it a sequel to that episode. And they start by showing several clips from that episode, where basically the aliens the alien from that episode survived and was all the way to modern times and is sort of like feasting off of people. But this particular alien claims to be like the cop that's hunting down the killer that was responsible for the Jack the Ripper killings, and they play more flashbacks. They do that Western episode where they show the guy had the where he got the powers to blink people out of existence and said that was the alien, even though that doesn't really match with that episode at all, because we know these were just they weren't aliens. These are robbers who met an alien who gave them telekinetic powers or powers to wink people out of existence, which had nothing to do with the powers that the other aliens from the Ripper showed. But whatever, they just played that clip in order to put it into that context. But then the other dude who was at the scene of the crime shows up at the police station. He says that he's the alien, and he says that actually he's the good alien, he's the cop, and the other one, who they already have in prison, is actually the criminal. And then they show a flashback to A Stitch in Time to say that what's her face, Michelle Forbes' boyfriend was actually an alien, and so when she came across the time machine, the alien is like found out about the time machine, and that the alien killed the FBI agent that Michelle Forbes played. I think Pratt was her name, and that they stole the designs on the time machine. They're trying to recreate the time machine so the alien can travel back to any time and kill people at their will. And I think there was more flashbacks they showed that didn't really fit with this narrative, but I can't remember what it was now. Regardless, so the main character becomes convinced that the alien that she's been talking to, who they arrested the first time, is the cop alien, the good alien. But her partner is talking more to the other alien. He becomes convinced that the other one who came in later is actually the cop alien, the good alien, and the other one's bad. So then they somehow go to the factory where there's a time machine, and they have a showdown where the two partners end up shooting at each other. And then it's revealed, dun dun dun, that both the aliens are bad, and they've just been playing with each other, and they're just like playing games because they're bored and they have nothing better to do. And then so the main character's partner dies, and they try to shoot the aliens, but of course they can't die because they're aliens, so it doesn't matter if you shoot the human bodies. But the human hosts are about to die, so they need another host to go into, or they'll die. And so the main character shoots herself in the head and says, "Better luck next time," killing herself, but making it so that the aliens have no host to go into, so they die. Which is quite a nifty ending. I actually quite like that. But, it is still a clip show, and the clips, as I say, don't really conform, and they kind of just get in the way of the narrative rather than actually help it, and they don't actually conform that perfectly or fit that much into the narrative they're trying to tell. It just makes it a little confused. But I do like the main idea, and I think the main idea of the episode actually really works, about the two aliens saying, I'm the cop. And I think it's better than that Stranded episode where that other alien pretends to be the cop when clearly he's the criminal. But this time they're both pretending to be, and it shows that neither one are the cop or criminal. They're both killers just fucking around because they're bored. I like that. And I actually thought it was a powerful ending where, and this again kind of reminds me of the other episode where the people shot themselves in order to keep the peace treaty, where she shoots herself in order to kill off these aliens and says, "Better luck next time," which is a quote from the Jack the Ripper episode, because that's what they said in that, and so they sort of reused that for this episode, which I like. And I think this is actually much better than Jack the Ripper episode, if I'm being honest. So I think they actually improved upon it. So they kind of succeeded with this clip show, even though I'm kind of sick of them doing clip shows, and I hope that season 6 and 7 doesn't end on the clip show, but I'm sure they will, because season 2 is the only one so far that hasn't. Don't know why they're doing clip shows, but if they must, this is a much, much better entry than the last two, which were terrible. So, yeah, it was actually a decent episode. So, those are all the episodes of Season 5 of The Outer Limits. So, as I always do, let me name the best and worst episode of the season, per my opinion, of course. So let's start with the worst episode, and we got a lot of contenders for this. We got the Shroud, the one where they tried to impregnate a woman with baby Jesus who had telekinetic powers. That was silly. Or the Grell, which was a too obvious analogy, slavery analogy about these aliens who were being kept slave, and the other master had to learn what it was like to be treated like a slave. Done before a billion times, and a billion times better. Descent, the one where the good actor who plays a crazy man starts to take these drugs to make him the alpha male, and the analogies were so obvious and contrived, and the whole episode was ridiculous. And so I'm down to 2 episodes, and I had a really hard time sort of going. I went back and forth which one is worse because they're both absolutely terrible. But in the end, I'm going to have to say that the runner-up is What Would the Neighbors Think? Is actually, I gave this a runner-up and not the worst plot because it is an interesting concept, and it starts out good. It's just the way it's filmed and the style that they do is dumb. It doesn't make any sense. It actually makes it harder to follow. It makes it unbelievable. It makes it silly to a degree that annoys the fuck out of me. So I didn't like that episode, but because the acting is decent and had a decent premise, I had to give worst episode of Season 5 of The Outer Limits to The Other Side, where the acting is absolutely terrible. I mean, other than the Karate Kid, he was decent. But it's the one where, the scientist creates this place for people who are comatose to go, and they're like, oh, isn't this so great? And, oh, I don't like it here. It's just so poorly written, so poorly acted. It was so cheesy. It reminded me of like a really terrible B movie. This Outer Limits is better than this, people. This is sinking to a new low. Anyway, now to get into the best episodes of the season. There were some really good episodes this season. The one I was just talking about, I'll call that out as an honorable mention. Better Luck Next Time. It was actually a decent episode, even though it was a clip show. The Haven, that has the high-tech apartment building that tries to kill them. It's silly parts of it, but it was still a really good episode. Then you got the Human Operators, as I said, an episode I've seen dozens of times before, but it's a really good, powerful one about these. It's a really interesting concept about humans who are being used as slaves by ships in order to repair and run their systems, and they end up breaking free. And the whole way it was acted and written was like really, really good. Then there's Deja Vu, despite the fact that it was miscast by having Kevin Nealon play the lead scientist. It was a very interesting time loop story. It was a unique time loop story. I love the way how the loop was running short and how the scientist had to recruit his ex in order to help him overcome the evil Ronnie Cox. And that ironic ending where Ronnie Cox is repeating his death over and over again, that's pretty terrible. So yeah, good ending. Good episode overall. And my runner-up for best episode will be The Summit. As I said, first time seeing this episode, really powerful episode about trying to make peace. And I actually thought it was way more interesting that they actually had the enemies be other human beings and not aliens. I think that actually helped. It made me think, I think Nareen Shankar, I don't think he was credited for writing this episode, but he's like an advisor, and it made me think it's kind of a precursor to The Expanse with the Belters and the Earthers. It was kind of similar to that, but yeah, that ending was really powerful. But best episode of the season, of course, has to go to Tribunal. As I said, this is an amazing episode. I was literally, no joke, no exaggeration, I was literally drenched in tears after watching this time. It's a really powerful sci-fi dive into the Holocaust and the horrors of the Holocaust, but putting this sci-fi twist that makes it sort of more of a a feel good tale in the end. Like when the guy brought like his half sister to his father, like that's just such a powerful moment. Like, no, even though it doesn't really make sense that the time travelers would let him get away with that, he's like, oh, the time traveling guy's like, oh, I'll smooth things over. Like, how? But that was such a powerful moment. I mean, that was such a great episode. So my rating for season 5 of The Outer Limits as a whole, I'm gonna give this out of 10. I'm going to give this a 6 good. Yeah. And one of the lower ratings, as I said, I think this is one of the seasons I was least impressed with. Even though they had some really, really great episodes, like maybe one of the best, Tribunal, and other good episodes like Deja Vu, The Summit, and Human Operators, and 2 other episodes that were pretty decent. Majority of the episodes were actually not good. And this, I will say, other than those great episodes that were really great nuggets that I was kind of hungry for in the season, that consists of mostly mediocre to bad episodes. So overall, as I said, it seemed to me like they focused more on those great episodes and kind of ignored the other ones, and just a season that is mostly bad delivered with a few great episodes. Not that good season overall. So overall, I gotta give it an average rating, or slightly above average, 6 good. So that is it for my review of Season 5 of The Outer Limits. Thanks so much for watching. If you stuck through this whole long video, I shall be back next month and every month after to finish my coverage of The Outer Limits with Season 6 and Season 7 left remaining. So be sure to check out my channel for that. Also check out my channel for many more reviews on other shows like Star Trek, The Expanse, Breaking Bad, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.